As Florence grew up to womanhood, she found more and more work to do. There were mills and factories in the neighborhood of Lea Hurst, and in the hosiery mills especially, hundreds of women and girls were employed, many of whom lived on the Nightingale estate. She may have been 17 or 18 when she started her Bible class for the young women of the district, holding it in the tiny ancient chapel at Lea Hurst, which I described in the first chapter. Gathering the girls around her, she would read a chapter from the Bible and then give them her thoughts about it and explain the difficult passages. Then they would all sing together, her sweet, clear voice leading the hymns. Here is another memory very precious to the old women who were once those happy girls. They loved to tell how beautifully Miss Florence used to talk. Long years after, when Miss Nightingale, spent with her noble labors, would come to Lea Hurst for a time of rest and refreshment, the daughters of these girls counted it a high privilege to gather on the lawn under her window and to sing to her as she sat in the room above, and would go home proud and happy as queens if they had seen the saintly face smiling from the window. Shall I try to show you Florence Nightingale at 17? Her face was little changed from that of the girl we saw in the cottage cheering old Goody Brown. She still wore her hair brushed smoothly, Madonna-wise, on either side of her face. Often now she wore a rose at the side, tucked in among the shining braids or coils. You would think her frocks very queer if you saw them today, but then they were extremely pretty. Full skirts, no crinoline, that was to come later, and full sleeves, with broad flat collar of lace or embroidery. When she went to church or to make visits, she wore a spencer, a kind of full-plaited jacket with a belt, something like a Norfolk jacket, only different, and a leghorn bonnet. You have seen pictures of the leghorn bonnets of the 30s and 40s, coal scuttles, some people called them, and they were something of the shape of a scuttle. Some of them were enormous in size, and they looked queer enough now in pictures, or if your grandmama had a way of keeping things in the dress-up trunk or cupboard in the attic. But people who were young in those days tell me that they were extremely becoming, and that a pretty face never looked prettier than when it peeped out from the depths of a huge straw coal scuttle. When Florence rode on horseback, her habit was so long that it nearly touched the ground, that is, if she followed the fashion of the day, but I should not wonder a bit if she and her mother were too sensible. And she wore a round, broad-brimmed hat with long ostrich plumes. I remember a picture of the Princess Royal, afterwards Empress Frederick of Germany, in a costume like this, which I thought one of the most beautiful things I ever saw. So I shall imagine Florence on an afternoon ride with the squire, let us say, dressed in this way, but when scampering about on her pony, I trust, she wore a less cumbrous costume. You will remember that the Nightingales spent the winter at Embley Park in Hampshire. Here, too, Florence was busy in good and helpful work. At Christmas time she found her best pleasure in giving presents to young and old among the poor people about her, getting up entertainments for the children, training them to sing, arranging treats for the old people in the poorhouse. On Christmas Eve the village carol singers would come and sing on the lawn, old English carols that had been sung by generation after generation. Poor Anthony Babington over at Lea Hall may have listened on Christmas Eve to the same old sweet songs. Then who so glad as Florence to call the singers in and bid them welcome and Merry Christmas, and aid in distributing the mince pies and silver coins which were always their due. When Florence was fairly grown up, other things came into her life, the gay and merry things that come to so many girls. Mr. Nightingale was a man of wealth and position, and liked his wife and daughters to have their share in the gaieties of the county. So there were many parties at Embley and elsewhere, and Florence danced as gaily, I doubt not, as the other girls. She went to London, too, and she and her sister were presented to Queen Victoria, and had their share of the brilliant society of the time. But much as she may have enjoyed all this for a time, still her heart was not in it, and she soon tired, I fancy, of dancing and dressing and visiting. Already her mind was turning to other things. Already her clear eyes were looking forward to other ways of life, other methods of work.
This is a very old machine. This was owned by my Aunt Ann Keene. Maiden name was Wakarook. She was my mother's father's brother. And the machine has the advantage of having all metal parts. It doesn't do a whole lot.